Hi everyone and welcome to episode 73 of the ITSM crowd. Today I'm joined by Peter Brooks and our topic is governance. So I'm going to ask Peter to start by introducing yourself, please.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. I've watched and enjoyed a few of these before, so it's quite an honor to be invited to take part. A brief introduction. Well, I'm currently mainly involved in training and consultancy to people who are interested in service management, ITIL, and also governance, of course. I've also been involved in the past in service management more generally than just governance. So the route into governance has been from service management. I was involved also with ethical governance, clinical governance for a while with a hospital. So I got to know that side of governance quite well. They were setting up a hospital in Abu Dhabi. So it was a chance to get to know not just the IT side of it, but also, in this case, the clinical side of governance. And I got quite involved as a part on the ethics board for the clinic for a while, which was also useful in seeing how to guide the ethical approach to things, which is a crucial part of all governance, of course.
Thank you very much. It is an absolute pleasure to have you with us. My name is Claire Agutter. For anybody watching, if you've got questions while we're live that you want to ask Peter, then you can use YouTube comments and pop your questions into there. We can see them here during the broadcast. And if you are watching this on catch up on the YouTube channel, you can contact us on Twitter as well. So you can use the hashtag ITSM crowd, and you can also find Peter on Twitter, which is at Fustablarication.
At Fustablarication, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure entirely how you pronounce that, but if you are watching us live, I can see we've got some people here at the moment. Please do put any questions you've got into YouTube comments. So the first thing that I always like to start with a topic like this is a definition, because I guess certainly early on in my career, governance was one of those words that everybody threw around and it sounded very important. And we talked about project governance and organizational governance and program governance. Back then, I never really felt like I understood it. If you ask me now, I'm still not sure I would be able to say, yes, I understand it perfectly, because I sometimes think that the definition I have in my head is too simple. So can you start by telling us what we mean when we say governance?
Yes, of course, and that's a very good point. It is often misunderstood, and that makes it very difficult because you can end up talking at cross purposes with people where you both have a different idea of what you're talking about. And like many names of large topics, it doesn't mean only one thing. It has got a number of meanings, and you mentioned one of them in talking about things like project governance. Really what it means there is administration and checking for compliance. That's what people usually mean by that level of governance. Just making sure things work as they should, and that you've got the right checks in there. And that's an important part, but it's not really governance in the sense that I'd be talking about it, or in the normal sense of corporate governance. And there, I think the best word that sums it up is stewardship. If in the old days somebody owned a farm and left the farm to go on holiday somewhere, they would leave a steward in charge. And the steward's job was to look after the farm, everything necessary to make sure that when the owner came back again, it was in good shape, the crops were growing well, the people working there were happy, there had been everything to do with making sure that it worked. The big question then comes is, oh, well, isn't that what managers do?
Yes.
And yes, managers are responsible for the operational side of governance. So day to day, a manager is there making sure that the direction is followed and people do what needs to be done, and that, you know, it again, like a steward, making sure it works. But the governance itself, corporate governance, is the job that the owners effectively of the organization have to do.
Yes.
And theirs isn't operational. They're not there every day doing it. They may meet 2 or 3 times a year, more often. And the sort of people who would be in these bodies would be a board of governors in an organization. In something like a hospital, there'd be the hospital board in charge of the hospital that would meet to do that. In a university, the vice chancellor would have a committee, and that committee would be accountable for governance. And often some of the stewardship responsibilities are somewhat split. So the long-term governance of the organization would be the responsibility of that core team, but short-term governance would be more a management capability. But the big difference is the responsibility. If you are a manager and you do what you should be doing, if something goes wrong in the organization, you haven't done anything, you won't be found liable for it. You've done your job, that's it. You don't need liability insurance because what you've done is fine. If, however, you are a governor, you're accountable for the organization. If something goes wrong then and you haven't taken care to govern that area, then you are accountable. So if you look like a real example of let's say the wreck of the Titanic.
Yes.
In the case of the Titanic, the owners were the Star Line, who owned the ship. They were accountable for making sure that the ship was seaworthy, and that they hired a good captain who got the right qualifications and did a reasonable job, and made sure that the rules on board were correct. So when it went down, the direct fault, if you wanted to find fault, was, as we know, with the captain, who didn't take the advice, wasn't alert to the advice, and believed that because the ship couldn't sink, an iceberg wasn't anything to worry about. So he did something wrong in his duty as a captain. The question comes of what did the Star Line do that was wrong? And what they did, the crucial thing that they did wrong, was when they commissioned the boat, they didn't put enough lifeboats on it.
Yes.
Their job was to make sure that in the worst case, it was safe, even if it sank. But because they believed it would never sink, they thought, well, we only need a few lifeboats. And that was the responsibility of the Star Line. Their job as governors is to make sure that things are set up so that, in the modern terms, all the stakeholders, the shareholders, the customers, the passengers, the crew, if they hadn't crashed into an iceberg, but they'd crashed into a lighthouse, the stakeholders would be the lighthouse keeper. Anyone who's involved in the enterprise is a stakeholder, and the governor's accountability is for that. And the accountability is in law. If something goes wrong and the organization is sued, they are personally accountable for what has happened. So governance, if somebody is on the board of governors, board of directors, it's essential that they're aware of the huge responsibility they hold. I mean, that's a negative way of looking at it. The positive way of looking at it is they are accountable for deciding the overall direction, the mission, and in modern terms, and this is something that now I'm really pleased is coming through in many things. It's come out in ITIL 4. It was something that I was pushing for in that book, the ITIL book, Adopting Service Governance. And it's something that now I'm on the committee for ISO 3700, which is coming out probably in a few months' time. That's for the governance of organizations. So it's a worldwide standard for governance. all of them are now understanding, firstly, the term stakeholders. Governance is not about shareholders. No board of directors can, and this is a change from years ago, no board of directors can say, well, it doesn't matter. They're not shareholders. We don't have to worry. All stakeholders are important.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it's about value. And the governors of the organization are accountable for making sure that it delivers value to stakeholders. And that includes non-employees, like the lighthouse keeper.
And that's quite a recent change, isn't it? I think this idea that companies don't just exist to service shareholders, they have a broader responsibility for that. And that's kind of a shift in organizational thinking that's quite significant, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we've seen some of the realization of this just for the COVID crisis. It's not good enough to say, oh, well, we had a service continuity plan, so, well, you know, it doesn't matter. It does matter to have had a plan, a way to make sure that you can continue to deliver value after it. And yes, it's a big change. It's not as recent as you'd think it was. And part of my frustration over the last decade or two is how slow it is to make progress in this area, because 20, 30, 40 years ago, the Roundtree Commission came up with a set of rules that are part of the UK Finance Act that started this process of understanding what organizations are there for, why a company exists and how it should be governed. Since then, there's been a lot of work done. One of the leaders in this field is South Africa, where the King Commission, run by ex-Judge Justice King, has done a tremendous amount of work, and that is now part of South African law in understanding what governance really means, what an organization is there for. And the delivery of value to human beings, to humanity, is the ultimate job of all companies. And when companies decide that they're going to take governance seriously, these are the first few questions they have to ask. Firstly, who are the stakeholders? All of them. What are their interests? What value are they wanting? What value can the organization give? And again, a really important change in thinking that we see is in ITIL2 and in ITSM and lots of other areas, is the understanding that the delivery of value is not about the output.
Yes.
What you do. It's about the outcomes. So if somebody buys something from you, a service or a device, what matters to them is not the list of things about what it does. What matters is what they are getting from it. So you really need to understand what the customer experience, more than that, the stakeholder experiences of your organization and whether that's adding value to their lives. And though it's been slow getting here, this now is, I did a little thing of the draft copy of ISO 37000 to look at the words, the most common words, and value and stakeholder right up at the top. Services not yet, unfortunately. That's a future thing where I believe organizations should govern themselves using services, using the service metaphor as in service management, so that the directors can look at their organization as a set of services, obviously linking to suppliers and linking to the people they supply in a large value chain, you know, all these words from service management. But at the moment, those words are now more at the service management level. Now the words value, stakeholder, and outcomes and are at the governance level. And of course, ISO standards always lag behind thinking. They take they're not in the forefront. They're always codifying what people are already thinking. So a lot of this is already happening. A lot of companies are governing themselves, but the progress depends on the sector, the company, the country. Some countries still have the old-fashioned box ticking thing that used to be called governance.
Yes.
Sarbanes-Oxley is a good example of that, or Basel II, a huge list of questions and a checklist which you can tick things off. And if you've got ticks in all the rows, you can say, we're done, we're sorted. And that's absolutely not what governance is about. However good the questions, however nice the ticks, it is not about ticking boxes. It's making sure that you're thinking seriously about what it is. And the final word that really is crucial now is in the standard, and I've been pushing hard for it to try and go further, is sustainability. An organization should be sustainable. In the old days, that was just thought of as green issues, environment.
Yes.
You shouldn't be polluting. And that's part of it, absolutely. Environmentally sustainable is essential for all stakeholders. It's still important, but sustainability is much bigger than that. Sustainability means in the medium and long term of humanity, or human beings as we are now, is this organization delivering value in a sustainable way in the big picture? If it can only do that by mining precious metals in the Congo and causing wars, in terms of humanity, that is not sustainable. Not because it's difficult to get hold of the minerals, but because of the misery being caused in the Congo is part of our human misery, and causing it and creating stuff is not sustainable for humanity. So sustainability is a very much bigger picture, that something is there for the good of humanity. And sorry,
I was just going to ask, is the content in the standard, do you think this is aspirational and it's how companies should be looking to move forward? Does it reflect how companies are actually behaving at the moment? I guess when I think of some of particularly the large tech organizations, that there are questions about their sustainability, their ethics, so is the standard something to try and start the conversation, or does it reflect something that's happening in the world right now?
It's both. Some organizations have got the bit between the teeth. They've been doing it for years. They're doing a good job. And every year they're publishing a report showing how they are governing the organization. So these days, that's the way it works. Instead of having an annual, we passed a checklist, you produce a report saying, this is what we are doing to deliver value to our stakeholders, and this is how we are making sure it's sustainable. It's a document saying what the organization is intending to do. Some people are doing that. Other people are other organizations, the complete opposite. I mean, I don't want to pick on anyone in particular, but looking at an unsustainable model, one that comes glaringly to mind is Uber. I mean, yeah, everyone likes catching an Uber. It's a great idea. They've taken jobs away from ordinary taxi drivers, and they've replaced them with jobs that are much less secure, get paid less well, and they're more onerous, because the model wasn't really designed to be a long-term job. It was when Uber first came out, the whole idea of the stakeholders is there'd be people who'd got, they were going somewhere anyway, they could take someone for a lift. And in that model, it all made sense. But now they haven't been able to change the governance model to understand how it's working and the people, the stakeholders who are being so affected. And they're still operating by getting money from investors to run operations.
Yeah.
So they are it's like a Ponzi scheme. They are using money from investors to pay to give people rides around the place. That's not sustainable. I mean, no. Eventually the music stops and somebody is, it's all going to fall apart. And running an organization like that is irresponsible. It's bad governance. And in many countries that wouldn't be accepted. And I think what should begin to happen with something like ISO 37000 is that if an organization like Uber wishes to operate, say, in the UK, in the future, one of the questions will be, are you complying with this standard? And the fact is that they're not, and that they are not operating sustainably. So that would constrain what their operations could be in the UK. In another country that still hadn't caught on, it didn't care about governance particularly, they could continue to operate. But the overall aim is to try and to get control of all organizations back into the hands of human beings. Because
Yes.
the legal thing behind all of this really is that an organization, a company, a corporation is an entity that in law we treat as if it's a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Legally, so they can make contracts, they can own money, they can own property, they can do all these things. But of course, they can't die because they're not human beings. You can't send them to prison, they're not human beings. So we've given them all of the rights and none of the responsibilities of human beings. And some organizations have taken advantage of us and are actually working against the interests of humanity. And those organizations, frankly, shouldn't exist. And the job of governance is to move, because obviously it will just destroy livelihoods of people working from them today if you were to just close them down. So it's a progression where companies that are delivering negative value or poor value can learn how to improve their governance, change their model so that they're no longer, for example, mining materials in the Congo, but make it an urgent need to replace that with more ethical, sustainable materials so that they can continue to operate into the long-term future. And it's a slow process because every single organization has to be part of it eventually. And I think it's a tremendous milestone to have a standard coming out. I'm delighted. I'm delighted that the standard has got these important things: stakeholders, value, sustainability there at the really heart of it, and things like whistleblowers, for example, because
Yes.
they're one of the keys to how things are going to change. An organization may look very pretty on its corporate website, and it may produce a lovely sustainability report every year, but if somebody inside the company knows that that's not true, that person now will have the incentive, the responsibility, in fact, under good governance, to report the matter to their immediate management, if nothing happens, to become a whistleblower so that people can see what's really happening. So it's a matter of humanity taking back control of organizations. And sorry.
I was just going to ask, because I think Uber's an interesting example, and we can look at other companies like Tesla that are, from a stock market perspective, hugely successful, at the same time loss making. There's maybe questions about how they treat their staff. So, but looking at them from the outside, you would think these are phenomenally successful companies. Is good governance a strategic advantage? Can it create a successful organization?
Yes. And it has to be. Because if an organization is making lots of money and has got a high stock price, but is causing misery to thousands of people, it is not a successful company. It's an unsuccessful company. A company that is making very little money on the stock market, but is delivering good value to its stakeholders, is a successful company. The measure of money is not the measure. The measure of value is what and this is why value is so important, because yes, you can turn value into pounds and pence in some circumstances, but value is more than that. Value is about what something is really worth to us as human beings. Money is what you give away in exchange for something that's more valuable to you. Every time you buy something, you're saying this money is worth less than what it is I'm getting. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving my money away. Yes. So what we value are the things. Money is merely a tool for getting things. And having too much of it, lots of it, is not success. Using it effectively to deliver value to people is success. I mean, so if we look back at the past, that people have seen when there've been great excess that it's gone too far, and some things like the breakup of big monopolies has happened a few times in the year, where it's just too obvious that they set the prices, they exploit people, they do all the things that corporations do when they're allowed to get away with it, and the solution has been to break them up. And unfortunately, that's usually too late. It's very disruptive, and it creates a whole lot of other issues of its own. And I think far rather adopt good governance and move organizations so that they don't end up abusing their position. And I was wanting to link this a little bit more into IT and services, because that's what most people listening to this will be involved with. There are a few governance models, and they have been getting better, like the one from Osaka, for example. And there's also an ISO document on IT governance. And these, both the Osaka model and the IT model, may not wish it themselves, but are in fact used in the way I said of the other sort of governance, management, administration, a way of getting things done, not the bigger picture governance of delivering value to stakeholders. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as they are only used under the control, under the governance, under the stewardship of proper corporate governance.
Yes.
So some organizations have abrogated that control. They've said to IT, we don't know what you chaps are up to, just get on and do it. That is completely and absolutely wrong. If they go and do it with the ISO standard for governance or Osaka or anything, it's still wrong. IT can only operate if it is delivering value for the organization as the organization wishes it to happen. And this is why I'm such a fan of service governance, because that allows every service to be designed so that the delivery of value, the stakeholder needs are designed into each service. So you can follow it down from the board direction, this is what we are doing to deliver value to our customers, into an actual service and say, and this is where at this level, this is actually done and happened. So you can link the operational day-to-day work to the long-term strategic sustainability at the top level. And both in terms of measurement and control, the board has got a way of knowing that things are happening as they should. Because I said whistleblowers are a good thing, and they are, and they're crucial. But if an organization is well governed, they shouldn't be necessary, because automatically when something isn't working in terms of what the organizational values are, you know, if you're a member of staff and you see organizational value one is we do such and such for our customers, and day to day you're not doing it for your customers, you have an obligation under good governance to let your manager know, look, we're not doing it for this customer, so that the management process can then take care of that and realign you, because the world's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be a matter of saying, yeah, this is a direction, this is how we're trying to get there, but things, you know, go out, there's icebergs and you have to take action to get out of the way of them and so forth. But that all needs to be done under the control of people who are well governed as part of the organization. And crucially, of course, employees are stakeholders just as much as owners, shareholders, or customers. So you cannot deliver a model where you are having really happy customers, but miserable, underpaid, not with a living wage staff.
Yes.
It doesn't grok, it doesn't work. And a lot of people, when they realize the magnitude of this, they say, but this is too difficult. How can we possibly do all of it? And the answer is, I'm just saying, of course, you can't at once. It's a matter of realigning and moving toward it. So in South Africa, where they've been implementing it, 10 or 15 years ago, they had a very light touch, produce a sustainability report to get people into the idea. As time has come on, they've added more, and people have become more used to what's expected. So it's not an immediate thing to suddenly stop doing the wrong thing and do the right thing, but to start understanding it, working out where the most egregious issues with the organization are. Something like the Bhopal disaster was a terrible example of where Union Carbide, who owned the company, or Exxon, Union Carbide, I think it was, simply had not considered the stakeholders. The people living around the factory were not part of any of their concerned designs or anything. And the disaster showed that they were simply not concerned. If it blew up, it wasn't in their place. That kind of thinking has to go, and you can't outsource your misery somewhere else and say you're still a good company.
And I think I hate to stop you because I feel like we've barely
please
got beyond definition, but that's our 30 minutes. So we might come back and do a part 2 of this. But I think the thing for me is anybody with an ounce of humanity can kind of see the sense in that and how it then trickles down through the organisation. So for the people in service management watching this, there's the whole concept of technical ethics, there's bias in technology. So I think, there's definitely an application for this at every level of the organisation, this kind of thinking. So I hope everybody watching has enjoyed this as much as I have, because it is a fascinating topic. But just to kind of wrap us up, Peter, where can people read more? Where can they find out more about you, more about the topic? Where would you tell people to go and look?
Well, for people who are skeptical about how it works and want to learn more, I'd recommend, I would, of course, my book, Adopting Service Governance, which is published as part of the ITIL library. And obviously that's informed a lot of the thinking of ITIL version 4 with the value chains and moving it from a service management level up to an organization level, particularly because that book was written with boards of directors in mind. Unfortunately, it's too expensive for most organizations to just on-spec buy a copy for the whole board.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. I mean, they should be able to afford that. But I want it to be more an impulse buy that people would get. But still, that does set the idea and the direction of how it's going to work. I also think you mentioned it earlier when we were chatting that collaborative consulting covers a lot of the ideas behind how you work with an organization and how you understand stakeholders, understand what the value the organization is trying to build is, and how you start making those work. And when it eventually comes out, I'm hoping ITIL 3700 is going to cover a lot more. I'm meaning as it gets further from just being a draft, to write some blogs about how it's developing. At the moment, it's a bit too early. Things aren't cast in stone. But as it becomes more firmer, I'm hoping to write more about how that's going to work.
And we'll definitely share that content as well through the ITSM's on social media when it's available. So the next episode that we've got of the ITSM crowd is talking about leadership. So I'm joined then by Rachel McElroy from Solutionize Global and Liz Whitefield from Hippo Digital. Going to be talking about what leadership means in a digital environment, a little bit about women in leadership roles as well. So that should be a really good one. That's on September 24th at 4 p.m. British Summer Time. And it just leaves for me to say huge thank you to you, Peter, for just sharing that tiny bit of your enormous knowledge. Really enjoyed it. So thank you for being a guest. Definitely recommend Peter's books. And I'm pleased. And I will see everybody on the next episode of the ITSM crowd. Thank you, everyone.